So I'd like to welcome you all here this evening for our first Thursday evening education event in 2023. 2023 just doesn't seem possible, but here we are. And we're delighted to start off with the program from Dave Gula, who is the project planner for the project to cap I-95. Some of you may have heard his prior program. I think it was just about a year ago, Dave, when you came. And so you were pretty early in the process, maybe halfway through the process at that point in time. And a number of us had the opportunity to hear you speak then and are really looking forward to hearing where the project is now. And so I'm going to turn it over to you. If anybody has any questions, you can either enter them into the chat while Dave is speaking, or we'll have plenty of time for discussion after his presentation. So Dave, welcome. So glad you're here.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Always nice to get out and talk about stuff. Although people say I love to talk. I like to talk when I know what the project is. Okay, let me ask, because this always happens. Can you see just the slide, or do you see the slide with all the other information on it as well?
I'm seeing the slide and then something that says next slide.
Okay, let me switch the display. I don't know why it does that, but it always seems to do so.
It has a mind of its own.
It
there
does.
You go.
All right. Okay, so again, my name is Dave Gula. I work with the Wilmington Area Planning Council, also known as WILMAPCO, and I'm going to talk to you tonight about sort of the finished, won't call it the finished product, the finished draft for Bridging I-95, connecting the community. We have been working on this for over a year now. We started November of 2021. We finished with our last workshop in December of 2000, and actually no, it's exactly the same date. We had our first and last workshops 1 year apart. So that was November 17th. And since November 17th of 22, we've been, well, you'll see the presentations we've made that are part of our process. But we also have been editing a final report. As I mentioned, the final report is available on the website. And I did give the website, but I can send it if that link didn't work. I can send another link to Sue to spread around. So what I'm going to do tonight is walk you through a bit of the process, just because some of you may not have been around when we did the first presentation to Westminster, and then I'll show you kind of the progress we've made as we've gone through. This project was an opportunity to work with the community to certainly try to correct a problem that exists with I-95 currently, which is it's not a very friendly place to live around. And so when it divided the neighborhood, a lot of the things that maybe the federal government said they wanted to do when they were going to put this in, create a park-like environment on either side of it, didn't really happen. There's a lot of green there, but it's not usable green. As you all who live in the area know, there's a lot of trees along the sides of I-95, but there's a big fence, and you really wouldn't want to be between the fence and the roadway anyway. So all that green's pretty, but it doesn't really do what it was intended to do. So we were working with the community, the folks that are immediately impacted by I-95 every day, think about how it can look between Adams and Jackson Streets, looking down from 6th Street Bridge all the way up to Delaware Avenue Bridge. It was designed, and it still is, to be not only built on the community efforts that have gone on with United Neighbors, where you've seen the painting of murals on the bridges over I-95, but also to pull their ideas out, because we know better than to plan for people without including them. If you plan for people and you're not planning with people, at the end of the process, sometimes you really don't get anywhere at all. So we started early working with the community. We have an advisory committee made up of, well, actually, I think the next slide helps me with that. I'll talk about the advisory committee in a second. The study goals, as we set out, were to reconnect those neighborhoods that were divided by I-95. Again, that same study area I just mentioned. supporting the neighborhood, again, working with them, helping them to feel that this is a good project and that it's beneficial to them, but also that they've been part of the process. Providing not just a new space, but it's got to be safe. And it shouldn't just be for cars. It should be for people who are walking, people who want to walk with their family, with their children, with dogs, people who want to ride bikes. If you're in a wheelchair, you should still be able to get there and be comfortable and safe. And also then to create the idea of creating something that's not necessarily a regional draw, but something that's a neighborhood asset. The biggest challenge with building something big and fancy and new is that suddenly everybody wants to move into the area and take it over. We want to find a way to create something that the people who live there, who have been, dealing with I-95 and its impacts for their lives, can look and say, well, this is a great addition to my neighborhood, and I'm so happy I can still live here. There were a few things that we called givens, things we couldn't do, things we didn't want to do. There are no commercial or residential relocations. We aren't looking to touch anything outside of the right-of-way that we have there. So curb to curb from Adams to Jackson Street, the southern part of the 6th Street Bridge, and really probably the close curb on Delaware Avenue. There may be some other work we can do on Delaware Avenue to make it a little more pedestrian friendly, but that we'll have to see as the project goes on. We do have to maintain a traffic flow through the area. There are on-ramps and off-ramps to I-95. You do not want to create a problem where you have traffic backing up on I-95. So you have to make sure the traffic can still flow. But when we talk about the traffic analysis, I think you'll feel better about any worries that you might have about how this project will impact traffic flow. And no significant reconfiguration of I-95 means we just spent $200 million rebuilding this stretch of I-95. We can't plan within the next 10 years to destroy a ramp or something else. So that was a constraint that was placed upon us by the state of Delaware. And the state of Delaware is really a partner. I don't think I have the slide that shows all the partners here, but we're working very closely with DelDOT, who represents the state of Delaware. We're working with the city, and we're working with Delaware Transit Corporation. There are bus routes through this area. So all those things have to be considered as you're creating this kind of a project. But we also wanted to work with the neighborhoods. So these neighborhoods you see surrounding I-95, Cool Spring, West Hill, Hilltop, Hedgeville, Trinity Vicinity, West Center City, Quaker Hill. We had very, very strong ties to the communities. We invited specific neighborhood leaders from those communities to come and serve on the advisory committee, along with the project partners, the folks who are going to have to implement it. And I thought we had really good representation, not only on the advisory committee, but also at our workshops from these neighborhoods. Lots of people who live in the area came out to the workshops that we held, most of which were held within the area. There were a couple that were virtual, but the idea was make it as accessible as possible for those folks to come and be part of this process. The other people who served on the advisory committee were our elected officials at the city level, city council, the administration, city of Wilmington, mayor's office. Then we actually had participation from county executive and a couple of county council members. We had really good participation from our state senators and state representatives. And even at the U.S. level, our U.S. Congress people, we had good participation from Coons, Senator Coons and Senator Carper's office, with also some representation from the representative, he's Blunt Rochester. So that was the goal, was because that was the decision-making party. That's not always the case with projects, especially not with projects of this size, where you put your advisory committee and say, you are going to give us the important decisions as we go forward, with the caveats that I already gave you about not trying to change the neighborhood over, not trying to make changes to I-95 as it is, but within that, the scope of the work, we wanted the advisory committee to make the decisions on what it should look like and what we needed to do. So we started a public process. We had a visioning session on, again, November 17, 2021. We had a separate virtual workshop to do the same thing on January 12th in 2022. And the idea was, for the future of this area, what do people want to think of when they're going to look at the future? What do they want to see? So, phrases like a place for everyone, has to be safe and walkable, has to be well lit, colorful, including arts and not just greenery, but other sites of nature whenever possible. Programmed areas, not just a big field that people will use, but some areas that can be staged for perhaps community gatherings, some areas for potentially for places for food trucks to pull up. You can sit outside and have a snack. But then it also comes back to sustainability. Native plantings have to deal with the water that's falling in the area and how you're going to manage that stormwater as you build something new like this. And then some active pieces. What kind of play areas and exercise areas do people want? With also paying attention to the history of the neighborhood. And that can be done through art. It can be done through some historic plaques that can be put in. So all of these things were very important to the community members and the advisory committee members as we went through the initial process with the vision for the project. At both the advisory committee meetings and the workshops, so we had workshops in, again, November. We had an advisory committee, we had a workshop live and in person. We held them at the Trinity Episcopal Church. And then the next workshops we had virtually because there were folks who could not attend. It was still just coming out of the pandemic. So we did both an advisory committee and a workshop that were virtual. And we basically gave people the option of picking some of these things, gave them a whole list of potential amenities that could go into the park. And we asked them to vote using, in person, we basically gave you 3 stickers and you can stick the stickers where you want them, things you want the most. And you also had 3 stickers that were red and you could pick the things that you wanted the least. And so using those techniques and also mirroring that with our virtual workshops, these are the things we heard were important. Lots of trees, community gardens, pedestrian-only zones where cars aren't going to be intruding on your time, shade areas, multifunction landscapes, meaning areas that can be used very openly for lots of different things. So as we got into like what kind of play areas and sports play areas, that really wasn't the most popular thing that we heard about. People were saying if you build a baseball field, you can really only play baseball there. If you have a big open field, you can do whatever people want to do there. You could have exercise classes and things like that for the neighborhood. We wanted small group gathering areas, so some intimate areas that were set up within the whole area. We all wanted a lot of lighting because that's super important. Pollinator gardens, that's a challenge for bees are in the United States. Bees are threatened, and so having areas where pollinators could thrive is helpful. As I said, these flexible lawn spaces, more than one, cafes or movable seating is another important thing. A performance venue, and not a large scale regional performance venue. There's one gentleman who kept coming and said we should build the Big Kahuna. Some of you remember from the Wilmington riverfront that had concerts of a couple of thousand people. We never wanted to see it that big. This is the middle of a residential area. You're not really going to have success. You're not going to have a lot of good shows if you have to kick them out early, and you're not going to have very happy residents if you have late night loud things going on there. Traffic calming is important, and you may not think about it, but if you think about when you try to cross Adams Street or Jackson Street, the flows of traffic and the speeds at which they travel, that's not safe, that's not comfortable crossing, so we have to calm those areas. Protected bike lanes are getting more and more important around the country. This is going to be a wonderful amenity for Wilmington. Even if it's not like a regional draw, it still becomes something that city residents can use and enjoy. And getting people there on their bikes is something that you really want to do. Improving the accessibility to it, as I said, it's not just slowing traffic, it's making sure that it's comfortable and safe. And there has to be playground space, because even though there is a playground at Cool Spring Park, that's the only one in this area for the most part. So the idea is to bring some more amenities for children as well. So in April, we brought 3 ideas to the community. We didn't even call them concepts. We called them ideas. They were just, what do you think about? Are we capping the whole thing? Do we want to try to remove some of the cross streets so you could have larger spaces of green that wouldn't be interrupted by the cars driving across on the existing bridges? Do you want it to look similar from the full thing, or do you want to see completely different uses in different areas along here? And so after getting all the comments, both from the advisory committee and the workshop that we held in April, the center concept was the one people liked the most, mostly because they liked that maybe there'll be some longer spaces without bridges. So the idea that we might close some bridges to traffic and we need to study those impacts. So, I mean, that was good. That's the kind of feedback we're looking for as we move forward. And that really does take it back to the community telling us, you know, don't just make a little tiny cap. If you're going for it, go big or go home. If you're just looking at small improvements, then you're only getting small amenities and you're only making a smaller difference. So here's an idea of what the kind of comments that we got and how we did them. We basically, at our workshops, we had all kinds of stickers. We let people write on maps. We wanted them to tell us to look at something, give us their immediate feel for it. And so this is just a look at, you know, I know it's hard to read some of these things, but this is more the idea of things that people liked that we could carry forward. So back in September of this year, 2022, we had a second workshop. Where it was that by then we're at our third workshop, and we asked people, all right, based on what you told us, here's what we came back with. We are showing, and there was some initial traffic analysis done where we looked at the idea of closing 7th Street and 9th Street. I will talk about those potential closures when I get to the traffic analysis section. But you can see that we built on that concept for each one of these. There were a couple of differences with some of these. We thought at one point we might want some sort of a structure, and we didn't really think about what it could be, some developmental structure, which we showed on 2 of these ideas. And we really heard that wasn't what people were looking for. They don't want to see a big retail area. Give us enough space for maybe some open air markets, give us some space for food trucks. If you can put in a cafe and some restrooms, that would be good. So those are things that we heard. We did think about not capping part of this area. In this area in particular, you've got a lot of ramp activity going on. It will add costs trying to work around those ramps. But our advisory committee also had the Secretary of Transportation for DelDOT, and she said, why are you not capping the whole thing? She's definitely of the go big or go home school. So we heard that and we carried that forward. This just gives you some ideas of the things that people wanted. They wanted public green space, but not in just one area, because you don't just want one area. Like just because there's one group of kids kicking a soccer ball around, that doesn't mean the whole park shut down and you can't use it for other stuff. So definitely a couple of different rooms for different outdoor rooms for different kinds of activities. Gardens are certainly a thing that became strong. We looked at a couple of different locations for a playground. We felt that based on comments, and I'll show you, like I said, there's more comments. I'll show you kind of when we get to the final concept, how things played out. But really, again, it was just an opportunity for the advisory committee and the community to tell us, all right, here's some ideas. We're going to tell you what we really want. And again, we had that same kind of open tables where people could just sit down and write stuff, tell us exactly what they think. We had staffing at all these areas so that comments wouldn't get lost. We did a presentation. This was at the William Lewis Elementary School. So again, we're having our workshops right on the corridor so that folks don't have to go too far to get a look at what we're trying to do and give us their feedback. And this is kind of what things look like after we finished that part of it. Lots of comments. What do you like most? What do you not like? How should we be building these things? How should we be considering the layouts, putting what things in what locations? Nobody that attended the workshop said don't cap the whole thing. So that, of course, you know, that whole idea of do it all. You know, there's no good reason not to. Money is a thing, but money is always going to be a thing, and sometimes you gotta kind of look at how you're going to fund it, not what can we fund, but how will we fund what we want. And that's something I learned from a boss a long time ago. Is don't tell me what you can't do. Tell me how you're going to do what we need to do. You know, that's sort of what we're trying to do here. So we got additional comments. Again, that idea of development came out. People don't want to see, there's a concern even with the idea that potentially we could develop some lower rate housing on the area. It's a huge complication. Who controls that? Who's going to run it? What other things might come in with it? You know, you turn things over to a developer, you end up with retail and other things. Parking becomes a big issue. One of the things we've stated, parking is already a bit of a challenge in the neighborhood, and we need to deal with it. But we're probably going to be looking at federal grants to fund portions of this project. You do not tell the federal government that you're spending millions of dollars to cap a highway to build parking. It's just not a competitive. You're in a competitive environment. That is not a competitive grant. So you kind of remove some of those ideas of a regional, area where people will drive and park. This is really going to be for city folks. There will be some parking. I'll demonstrate that when I show you some of the changes to the streets around the project, but you don't want to focus your things there. So pedestrian and bike connections are super important. So people who live within a couple of blocks can walk or ride their bike. You should have restrooms. This is a big park. It's going to attract a lot of people. You can't be running home every 5 minutes. It's good to go to the bathroom. Again, the pedestrian-friendly street connections we'll talk about and that traffic calming are really go together. We were told that a dog park doesn't exist in the city right now, and so this could be a good area with all the space we've got, which, if you include the bridges, it's about 15 acres. So it's a pretty good sized park. You could almost put a golf course in if you really wanted to. The community amphitheater is a thing that came up. And so small performances, it needs to be lit well enough so that people are comfortable, but not lit so that, people decide that there should be a large venue concert area. So there's a little bit of balance that needs to go forward. So here's what we got. We're really happy with what our project team came up with. We hired a firm we hadn't worked with in the past. We hired them because they have done a lot of these projects around the country. They did a notable one at the Clyde Warren Park in Dallas, Texas, which is a model for most people when they're looking at this type of a project. They worked on the Penn's Landing proposed project that should be starting construction soon. So they've also got good experience locally. They're an East Coast firm. They've got offices on the West Coast. They kind of know how we think. They were associated with some work at the Boston Big Dig. So yeah, it's a team that knew what had been done in other places, and they're willing to bring those ideas here. Again, working with the community, try to get it just right. So we did look to cap the entire section from 6th Street all the way to Delaware Avenue. Again, a couple of large green spaces, the public green between 6th and 8th, the festival green between 8th and 10th, the knoll right up at Delaware Avenue between 11th and 12th, some idea of urban gardens, lots of tree planting, and I'll show you in one of our diagrams, I'll show how we propose to get larger trees in there. We've got some nice convoluted areas for walking paths and some not isolated, but smaller group seating areas. We do have a dog park. We do have a playground for children. We've got an amphitheater with a stage. That stage would also include restrooms for that section there. When you get up to this area along Delaware Avenue, and this box, I don't know if you all see the box. I'm going to move the box briefly. Delaware Avenue has the heaviest concentration of pedestrians in the area. So you want to make that more of a plaza type of approach. So you've got some trees lining it. You could actually do food trucks in some areas along through here. This is an area where we would try to put in a cafe if we could, and there would be restrooms there as well. And this is an area of covered seating. Again, if an area where you've got food trucks that can get to it, covered seating is nice in case the weather's inclement or it's really hot and you want some shade. So we're really happy with the design. The community was really happy with the design. We got wonderful feedback at the final workshop. I'll take you through a little bit deeper on some of that. I will stop here if there are any questions. Anybody got a question about anything to this point in the presentation? You can do the little hand raise thing if you want, or you can unmute and just tell me.
I have a couple of questions. You're talking about food trucks. My concept is this is elevated over 95. Will there be food trucks parked on the elevated part? And if so, how do they get up there?
Well, the elevation's not as crazy as you think, because right now, basically you would go from the curbs along Jackson and Adams Street to a fairly level area over top. The bridges over I-95 are of the prescribed height that they need to be. So we don't have to raise anything higher than those bridges that exist out there now. So there'll be a little bit of topography to deal with, but for the most part, you're not going to have to climb a steep hill to get into the park, if that answers your question better, the
No,
way we're going to lay it out.
yeah, my question is that pedestrian? I guess my concept is people go on some kind of a ramp, similar to the High Line in New York, where you have to go up steps to get onto the elevated park. Is that the concept here?
No, the concept here is that I-95 is already well below grade in this area. So think about the spot in 95 where in the city where I-95 is basically a canyon. And so what we're going to do is just put a cap over that canyon. We won't be going into the areas where that cap would interfere with traffic on I-95. If you go further south of 6th Street, I-95 gets level and then it becomes an elevated highway. But in this stretch, I-95 is a good 16 to 20 feet below grade, below the street level. So if we build right from the street level, we've still created a cap that won't hit high trucks, won't hit it, things like that. So it will meet all of the standards for the highway. I think I've got sideways pictures that will help you look at the concept a little bit better. So I will get to those.
Okay, before you leave me too, then where in this current diagram you have up is the playground? I think you mentioned the playground.
Playground is down just below 8th Street. Since we have
Oh, I see, nature
Yep.
play. I see, got
Since
it.
we have a playground at Cool Spring, the idea is let's go to the furthest south section and add a playground down there so the kids who live down here don't have to go so far to go to a playground. But what I'll do now, the next, oh, I got another hand raised. Is that Marge?
Thank you. Yes. Thanks for this presentation, Dave. I'm wondering about your urban gardens. Is that area gardens in the city, or is it an area where people can have gardens?
That's an area where you could potentially have those kind of community gardens, but it doesn't have to be. And even though we're giving a lot of ideas here, I'll be honest, we got a couple of years of design before this thing will even get built. And so there could be some more changes to what we're showing. Basically, what we're showing is a nice blueprint for the things that we heard people would want. Some of those areas could be community gardening where you could go and grow your own. They could also be specialized gardens. We will be working with the State Parks and Rec as part of this project. We also had included the Delaware Art Museum as one of our advisory committee members. And so some of those folks could help us with the idea of maybe some of these, instead of just gardens, or also art gardens where you can have mobile installations of art that could be changed over time or could be more permanent. So we're trying to keep it very flexible. I do have more to go, so I didn't want you to think I'm done. I'll give you a little bit more, insight into what we've got, because some of your questions are more about content, and I think that if I go to my next couple of slides, you'll see more of the content ideas. So here's sort of they call it like a Venn diagram, but basically it gives you ideas of how we kind of parceled out this room that we had. So we've got areas that are shade for people to sit, areas where you can stroll, areas where you can have a large festival, a picnic, or run around activities, an area where you could have an amphitheater where you could have sit and watch a community play or a small community music. We do have a dog park, and there's the playground here. There's a promenade along here with a splash zone. So it's not like a fountain that's hard to get in and out of. It's like those fountains you see where they come up out of the ground and kids can get out there and get a little wet on a hot day. Because it will be a few years before the shade trees will all be large enough to provide all that shade. So that's an area where folks can just get wet. Some of the other areas are more like a straight walk through. So it's better for bird habitat than a meandering trail. A gathering area, which could actually be a sledding hill up on that knoll area that's shown closer to Delaware Avenue. And then that whole plaza and the place where you could necessarily pull up a food truck. So this gives you an idea of some of the spaces. It's a little bit of a confusing piece, but what I wanted to show is the intersections along Jackson and Adams. We're showing intersection treatments. When I get to the traffic analysis, I'll kind of show you what those treatments might look like, but the idea is you have to slow traffic through here. You can't eliminate all traffic. There are ramps here accessing on and off to I-95. There are people who live here who have to drive around. And so you have to allow for the traffic, but you don't have to let the traffic dominate the area. And so we want to change the way the intersections look and feel so folks can cross the street comfortably and safely. And I think that's a key piece of this. So one of the things I really love about our team is their renderings are just amazing. So this gives you a view from 6th Street looking up at what this thing can look like. You know, there's no guarantees that, like I said, at this point, I think you're going to spend this much money, you're going to do it right. But we have to go through a couple of years of design, and folks could change things a little bit because, again, we'll be working with the neighborhood as we go through the process. But this just gives you an idea of what you might be looking at. It helps with the scale as well of how it could be. And I think that's the hardest thing to figure out in the perspective, as I think it was Marlis was saying, how do you get in and out? Is there a hill? Is there a ramp? I mean, so these will help a little bit to show you that the street grades will work very well. So here's one of an area from the south. You're looking up from 6th Street at a space. The amphitheater starts hills, or the I'm sorry, this is like a little bit of a rise to get to that field that you can play on. And it just gives you an idea how people fit into this. You know, that size is hard to look at and say how many people could fit, but you could, just this little space here that we're looking at, you know, will accommodate lots of people doing different things. Here's an idea, a look at the play area. They actually have, I think that it was a climbing wall, might have been part of it. Again, the final details are still to get measured. There's a slide, there's some areas to jump around. There's some stairs that take you up to what is that festival area, that field, but you can also see then the stage and the restrooms that you would have for the amphitheater. So you're getting a look at, again, how much room there is here as you start building things. This is looking from a different direction at that amphitheater and stage. It looks sort of to the east, so you can then see the buildings from downtown, which are well framed by the amount of greenery that'll be coming up as this thing matures and moves forward. This is a look from the opposite direction. We're looking at from 10th Street back to the south, towards Jackson. This is that area that we created a promenade. You could actually do like the farmers market there, or a flea market, or an art market. And then you can also see the sprinklers that are there that are popping up for kids to be, if you want to get wet, you can get wet. If you don't want to get wet, you don't have to get wet, but you don't have to climb over a fountain wall to get in. And it really encourages people to cool off on a hot day. And this is a perspective from Delaware Avenue looking down. You can see that cafe area here, the covered seating. It's got some solar panels on it, so you can be generating some of the power you need to light it. You've got the ability to pull some food trucks in on the plaza off of Delaware Avenue or down here. This is the knoll area that was created. We were working with folks at Trinity Episcopal Church, and the idea of, you know, this is something they said would be really nice to have across the street from them. You do have that 11th Street ramp. This is the southbound ramp from I-95, which is well below grade, as you can see, that rises and comes over and dumps cars off at 11th Street. So we have to work around that ramp. Here's the other ramp, the on-ramp for I-95 south from Jackson heads down. Again, you know, changes our contour, but we can build areas that are separate from that and still allow that movement to flow very well. You can see some of the other areas a little bit further to the south here. This is Cool Spring Park. This is William Lewis School. And so the idea is really you've got wonderful greenery at Cool Spring Park, and so now you can build off of that. So circulation, everybody, if you live in the area, especially, you want to know how's it going to affect how I get around. So again, we did a traffic analysis. Basically, we collected data, and this was still while I-95 was under construction, but that's an important piece of the study as well. But we also had data from before I-95's rehabilitation began. So we know what the traffic looked like pre-pandemic, pre-I-95 closures. And so those numbers were all compared to the expected traffic that will, as the city grows. Now, I've been working in Wilmington since 1989. I haven't been doing the traffic stuff quite that long, but the traffic levels in Wilmington don't change all that much over time. Whenever we've done a project and there's been a guess to how heavy traffic might be in an area of the city 20 years from now, 20 years later, we're like, it didn't change that much. So we've been very aggressive in providing these wide streets, 2 lanes where you might not have ever needed 2 lanes. Jackson Street is 3 lanes. There's 1 lane of parking, 2 lanes of travel. Adams Street's hybrid. In some places it's 3 lanes, in some places it's 4 lanes. There is parking along the curb. So the idea was, the bridges themselves are about 30 feet wide. There's 2 travel lanes on each one. You don't very often see all of these areas maxed out, probably first thing in the morning. I know that 10th Street is a challenge at when school drop off in the morning and the afternoon, which is one reason why we did not want to change the way traffic flows on 10th Street, because we know it feeds the school very well. But 9th Street, we have a bus on that street, but we talked to DART and they could make some changes to how that bus flows into town. It could just turn on to Jackson on its way back into town. It could travel all the way down to 6th Street. We could consider making 8th Street 2-way. Buses that can then get back on course. The bus going westbound is already on 8th Street, so there's no change to that. But really, we looked at the amount of volume on the bridges and the amount of volume on Jackson and Adams. And we were told by our traffic analysis team that any 2 of those bridges closed to traffic does not affect you. If you go to 3, it has more dire impact on how traffic will circulate through this entire area. We also did have them do a study looking at Jackson Street and Adams Street, and could you possibly do what's called a road diet on those to see if fewer lanes could still do the job. The other thing we did do is we talked to the fire department. Fire department, their main concern is response time. They have to stay within a certain amount of response time for people to be safe. And so when we talked to them, they said, as long as we know what you're doing in advance and you've done some testing on it, we can work around the bridge closures to make things work. One of the reasons that 8th Street was, again, not really wanted to be touched is because that's a direct line out to St. Francis Hospital. And so you don't want to impede, you don't want to have an ambulance wandering around trying to get out there. So if it's going from downtown to St. Francis, it's got a direct line. So those are the things that we were considered in this. Again, we looked at pre-pandemic traffic numbers. We looked at current numbers. In fact, the current numbers on Adams and Jackson were higher because there were a lot of detours in place, a lot more traffic on Adams Street in particular, because some of the other ramps you couldn't use them. And so everybody had to come up to the 10th Street on. So we then looked at reducing the number of lanes that were out there, and maybe not in the way you think about where we say, oh, we're just going to take a lane away. We can convert travel lane to a parking lane. Doing that adds parking to the area, which we're going to need. We already know we need some parking, but that will add the kind of parking that we will need, because people will drive to this park. And so you're going to have additional spaces. The traffic analysis showed that if you retime some of the signals that you need, you can still manage the traffic on Jackson Street with no problem at all by going from 2 lanes down to 1. Adams Street, we did a follow-up. They said, we can make this work to about 8th Street. At 8th Street, you've got a lot of ramp activity that starts. And so basically, the recommendation is that, again, we've got a couple of years of design ahead of us. We need to go back and do those traffic analyses to make sure that those work, especially now that we're sort of getting back to normal with traffic around I-95. The other thing that we can do, and we work closely with the city, and we see this in other spots, we can just close the bridges that we want to close with pylons for a month or 2 months and see how the traffic works around those. That gives us a real world chance to test what the modeling theorists have told us. The other thing is we can also take a lane if we need to on both Jackson and Adams, again, with traffic cones, and see how that functions. So these decisions aren't going to be made tomorrow because this project's not going to be built tomorrow. It gives us some time to test these things out and make sure that they'll all work. So yeah, I just covered this slide. The other things we wanted to talk about with that traffic calming idea is the ways that you can, even if you don't necessarily narrow the streets by taking the lane, you can raise the intersection a little bit. It doesn't have to be like, it's not like when you go over a speed bump. We won't have speed bumps in Wilmington. The city's against them, but a raised intersection is a gradual slope, and it really, then it enhances that pedestrians are going to be here. Makes you look around, slow down, take a look, and it treats the intersection differently. Usually you use a different kind of pavement so that as a driver, you sense that there's a change here, there's something going on. We could use, they call them chicanes, where you basically create your own obstacles to slow traffic. The straighter the path, the faster cars want to go. And the on-street parking is always good. It adds what they call friction. People tend to slow down when they have parking on both sides of them, as opposed to when you've got a lane that looks like an artery, a highway, you're going to drive like you're on a highway. So all these things are tools that we can use as we go forward. And here's some things. We also might be able to add bike lanes in these areas. And that's something that's important to the city. It's important to some residents. Not everybody wants to use a bike lane. Not everybody has to use a bike lane. But if you want to use a bike lane, we need them out there. Otherwise, you're mixing with traffic and it doesn't feel comfortable. So that's another way to calm traffic. If you've been to the riverfront, this is Justin Street. There's a raised intersection there. You can see what I mean. It looks like you're going up. It's probably only about 6 inches higher than the pavement around it. But all those treatments show you that this is an area where pedestrians might be and you should slow down a little bit. So again, the idea is to make things safer. Of course, all the intersections will have full pedestrian signalization, so you'll have that on your side as well. Here's a look at how a protected bike lane could work. Say this is Jackson Street. You've already got a lane of parking. You've got a travel lane. You have another travel lane. You could take that travel lane and make it into two-way bike traffic. So you wouldn't have to do both Jackson and Adams. You could have both your bike movements on one of those two streets. It probably works better on Jackson, but we'll see as things move forward. It also tends to work better, as was pointed out to me. We just got a comment the other day. If you shift the travel lane over, shift the bike lanes all the way against the curb, and put the parking, now you've created a protected bike lane. And it might actually work better in terms of how people are going to access, not necessarily the park, but a bike throughway through town is missing. If you're a cyclist and you're trying to get north, south, you don't have a lot of choices. And the streets are pretty hairy. So that's something to look at. Over time, when the cap is built, we could actually shift the bike lane right onto the cap. That takes it completely out of traffic. And that's another way to do this as well. So then you'd have parking lane with a center travel lane. On the bridges, I said we have about 30 feet. Technically, that's 3 lanes. You don't need more than 10 feet for a travel lane, unless you're trying to maneuver a large truck, which we wouldn't really be doing. So we got space for parking lane. Parking lanes are actually only 8 feet. You could do an 11-foot travel lane, and that additional 10 feet could also give you bike amenities on the remaining bridges. So if you didn't want to go two-way traffic on one of the bridges, you could do these things as well. So the idea is that we have a lot of options, and we don't have to decide all those things today. This goes back to the parking. You can see these red lines are drawn. It shows you where we can have another lane of parking. As I said, the neighborhoods are interested in parking. There's a worry that if you have a big park like this, you'll need some parking. You're not going to build a parking lot. As I said, you're not going to spend the money to cap I-95 and put a parking lot on it because it's too expensive. So you do have other options. You can use your remaining bridges for some parking. And so the point being, there are some options. This is limited. I think there are some other areas we can look at. This is over 100 spaces. That could serve the park on a normal day. So we think we're in decent shape that way. There's actually a line of parking along Cool Springs that's almost never occupied. And if you were doing that travel lane removal south of the ramp entrance, you've got another whole stretch where you could have more parking. So there's a lot of options. We think we're going to be okay, but as we move forward, we have to kind of iron those things out. Structurally, this is probably going to help a little bit with how this whole thing gets done. But there are 2 options. There's a closed option as they call it, the engineers call it a closed option versus an open. Closed option shows you these peach colored areas are basically filled dirt and you got retaining walls. The retaining walls would be on the outside of the existing shoulders on 95. So we're not taking any lane width from I-95. We met recently with both the bridge section and with I-95's kind of management down at DelDOT. There is no plan in the future to expand I-95, or they would have done it on this rehab project. So as long as we maintain the footprint of I-95, we're not going to have any problem there. So like I said, all these areas you see where you see that the peach color, that's where you'd have fill dirt, you'd have retaining walls along all these areas. It helps to have shorter beam spans. This heavy kind of orange line up the middle is I-95, the center. That's where you have to drill to put in your supports for this cap structure. There would still be a couple of beams. This is going to feel very much like a tunnel, though, and that's a concern. DelDOT doesn't have a tunnel section. There are no tunnels in Delaware. If you think about it, there are a couple things that are short, could almost be a tunnel, but they're not really. So there are a lot of other things that come with it. If we have to go to a tunnel, we've got to talk then about potential fire suppression within the structure, ventilation within the structure. There's a lot of other costs that could come in. And really, since DelDOT doesn't have a tunnel section, it means a whole other section of DelDOT to manage and maintain this. The open section basically looks like the current bridge structures. So the bridges stretch all the way across this 300 feet. And so would our span with our beams to support, so the cap that would support the park that's under it. Again, we do have that center line area where we're going to need to drill. And I'm told when I sat with the bridge section, the idea of drilling into that Delaware blue rock is not a pleasant task. That stuff is hard. And so, but it's going to have to be done and we'll make it work. So this is what it looks like from a side view. So this shows you Jackson Street's a little bit higher than Adams, most of the stretch. This is the closed section where you have that retaining wall on I-95 and all the fill. This is more open. This is what the current bridges look like. I'll switch this around. So Adams Street's lower, but to answer the question, there's no ramp needed to get up into the park because there's ample clearance underneath the existing bridges for trucks and all the traffic that passes on I-95. So we can basically start right about grade level. There will be some slopes. There are a couple of slopes built in to the park to try to level areas up a little bit. But the idea is you don't have to step up on ramps or anything like that to get up into the park. And so it's a pretty clean move. I do think the state favors the open plan, this plan here, rather than this closed plan where it is more like a tunnel. But we will see. Again, those are all things that are going to get decided as we go forward. There's a lot of work to do. I know I took a few questions. I've only got a slide or two left. So I'm going to try to get through these. This is what the structure would look like, though, that deck structure. And where you see down here, these I-beams, these are the I-beams that would support it. They might be concrete, they might be steel. They're going to build a substructure so that you have troughs. The troughs are where you plant your trees, your big trees. Big trees are going to need a couple of feet for the root systems. You're still going to have a couple of feet of dirt over top of everything. You got to manage your stormwater. You got a lot of things going on up there. But this is how you build the deck so that you can put trees on it and still support them all. And it's still as much weight as it seems like it's less weight than building a house or something else over I-95. And that happens all the time. So we wrapped up all our workshops. So this slide doesn't really show you much more than where we're doing all our workshops. We had our 4th workshop in December or November 17th. And so the steps needed to ratify this study. It's a feasibility study. Again, is it feasible? Sure it is. So we showed you how it's feasible. So we completed a final draft. People can review it now. It's online. We presented it to our public advisory committee. They're the folks we talked to about our public outreach policies and how we're doing, and they sort of give us the heads up, yes or no, you did well with the public outreach. We got a lot of endorsement from them. As I said, we did add a revised draft after we got all those comments to the website, so the most current version is there. We present it to our technical advisory committee. That's our partner agency. So that's DELDOT, that's DTC, that's the city of Wilmington, and they're all very much on board and endorse this study. So the feasibility of this project is not questioned. Cost is another thing. The cost is in the appendix, but basically each of those sections is a little over $100 million to build. So phasing it might be very important. You might not be able to do it all at once. I guess the last piece of this is that our council, who's the final word for WILMAPCO, votes on the 17th. We expect endorsement because that's basically the same partners who sit on the technical advisory committee. And I guess the last thing I have to show is this. So that goes back to the idea of phasing it. Each of these, this is the smallest of the sections, so it's the least expensive. It also seems like a good idea that if you're going to phase it to be the first section. This is a playground for an area that doesn't really have one. It brings a lot of those same amenities here. The second section then that would be phased, if in fact we have to phase it, is between 8th and 10th Streets. You get a little more bang for your buck. You get the marketplace, you get the sprinklers, the fountain area. And then that last section is probably the most expensive, probably closer to $150 million, simply because you've got to build around all these ramps. They really are a challenge. They're going to add a lot of cost. So the estimate was $350 million to $400 million for this cap structure if you do the whole thing. And we broke down each one of the sections so that if you have to phase it, you have a better feel for it. There is no some set aside pot of money for this project. So grants are going to be very important. There are federal grants that are keyed just to this. There is one called Reconnecting Communities. It's going to be a very competitive grant. It's a 50-50 grant, which means you only get 50% of the cost. You've got to come up with the other 50%. So what's going to happen is that after I say if, but I assume when our council approves the feasibility study, we hand it to DELDOT saying, you asked us to give you tell you if this is feasible and how much it might cost. It is feasible. Here's the estimated cost. And then the state of Delaware has to figure out if and when and how they're going to move forward with the project. I know that the secretary had a meeting in mid-December with the governor to talk. One of the topics was this study. He had to give her as much information as possible for that conversation. And we've not heard anything back. But basically, I guess at this point, it's good to take any questions that you have remaining. I know I've gone a little longer than 30 minutes, but I hoped to give you as much information as I could. And I have KC has a question.
Dave, maybe you want to unshare your screen or
I could do that. There we go.
Hi, David. Thanks very much for wonderful presentation. And as you were going through it, I kept sitting here thinking about the money part. So I'm glad you brought that up in the end.
Yes.
And so I know you don't know where the money is coming from, but is there any expectation or that there is the will out there in the community to find the money to do something like this? I mean, how feasible, how likely is it that we'll find the will to build a project as big as this?
It appears that there's will there. It is going to be a political question. There's a lot of thought that, hey, wow, the president's from Delaware. Is that going to help us? I don't know. I'm not the money guy. I'm not the money guy, and I'm not political if I can help it. So I don't know that helps us. I know we've got two very good senators and a very good U.S. representative. And I know that if there are funds that can be leveraged for this, I think that they're going to look hard at those things. We have a meeting, in fact, next week with Senator Kuhn's office to talk about this project. I think the idea is you start by applying for the grants to help fund it, and then you go looking for the other pieces of the money. I think since it's been done in other cities, I can say that the will in the communities, it's not like it hasn't been done, and it's not like they're getting a discount on theirs. So people find ways to get these things done. I think you need a good you need some private sponsorship money. You need someone to buy into it as well and champion it. City of Wilmington has been right there as we've gone forward. They've not agreed to leverage any funds. That's not usually the way that they fund their large infrastructure projects. State of Delaware technically funds large infrastructure projects in Delaware. It's generally not reflected in your taxes. Nobody's raised your taxes to do $200 million I-95 rehabilitation. And I know they applied for grants, but they didn't get them for some of those pieces. So it does come down to, I think, our current governor and our future governor, because I don't know what the time frame is to get this done, but I do know that it's a 2-year design process. I'll be honest. If you've got the money now, you can start designing, and that's 2 years, and it's probably a 2 to 3 year build process. So at best, we're 5 years out. It could be a whole lot further than that because it takes a while to raise the funds, as you noted. I think the community is very much in support of it. We have wonderful feedback from the community. We of course get Facebook trolls saying this is the worst idea they've ever heard. It's an absolute waste of taxpayer money, and money should be put other places. However, this project, I think, it spans the highway and park. And so the more pots you can dip your fingers in to try to get the money, the better the chance you have. So yeah, we could probably get some of it for transportation because it's over I-95. It has to have transportation funding, but it's also a very large park. And so are there grants that DNREC could leverage to try to get money put towards this? That's the way that I would go. If somebody asked me how I would fund it, I'd be looking at lots of different places. So you don't have to get one big lift from one particular agency. I take any other questions you got.
I just want to say it was a great presentation, Dave. Thanks.
Thank you. I
Thanks.
appreciate you inviting me.
And I was in Boston a week ago in the area over the Big Dig.
Yeah.
And you don't even quite realize where you are or what it is, but the city, that part of the city is so walkable. It's beautiful. It's kind of astonishing the impact that it has, not just physically, but in terms of the feel of it. And certainly the work that was done to create I-95 through Wilmington destroyed a lot in terms of community capability. And in fact, we'll be having a program on that topic. Casey has arranged that for later in January. That kind of gives us a little bit of the backstory on what happened when the decision was made to build I-95. And it happened in city after city after city. And so this idea of reconnecting communities is something that is taking hold throughout the country. Lots of cities are saying, you know, we have an obligation. We really created enormous disruption, and it's an opportunity for us to try to correct some errors that we made and some damage that we did. Not fully, clearly, but it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, the federal government has, at the moment, it's a multi-year grant program. So that reconnecting communities grant is not a one-year deal. So that means not only can you try, if you don't get it the first time, you can try again. It also means that you can say, we want to get phase 1 through one grant. And then sometimes it works where you go back for another phase and you get access to another grant. So the federal money, there's a lot of money out there to do it. You have to beat the bushes. You got to really go looking for it. It's not going to walk up and bite you. You've got to go find it. I'd be interested maybe in attending, if I could, that talk you're going to have later this month. So please keep me on your list for that.
Yeah, Casey, you want to say a word about that?
Yeah, Nina David, who you may know,
Yep.
will be coming to do that, and she's a planner, and we'll be talking about the ways in which this community in particular, was disrupted by building of I-95. So we're looking forward to that, and it will be these two presentations, I think, will nicely build onto each other.
And I
Emma,
believe that one's scheduled for January 19th.
January 19th, yes, sorry.
Okay.
2 weeks from tonight, 7 o'clock, same Zoom link.
If you're
Okay.
familiar with the Big Dig in Boston, the North End neighborhood in Boston previously was basically cut off from the rest of the city by an elevated highway that they put underground and created a park over top. And not only did it create the park, but the north end of Boston has been remade economically and residentially, which leads me to a question for you, Dave, is you mentioned something about private money or private something. And I know you also mentioned that if this park had an effect on residential, the attractiveness of the residential neighborhoods around it, that you don't want gentrification. You want to be able for the people that live in those neighborhoods now to enjoy the park. But has in your work on this, did you do any study on in terms of what impact the park itself would have on the city, like the impact that the Big Dig had on North End? Or
We have not done an economic development piece of this. We're basically a transportation agency, so
Yep.
I would say that that'll be one of the next pieces for sure. But I also think one of the next pieces is, since we started with this advisory committee, which comes from a lot of different agencies and institutions, you want to have buy-in from the city and Delaware Housing Authority and Wilmington Housing Authority to find ways to help the residents who live there upgrade their residences as a piece of this. If you were working with a developer, you'd ask for some sort of a community benefit agreement to try to guarantee that. I don't know how the state handles those things, and I'm not so I won't talk about it. I'm not an expert, but the idea is you got to enter into a partnership with the neighborhoods and the city and the state to try to preserve that, the ability for folks to stay in their neighborhood, but to make improvements as well. On the east side of Wilmington right now, there's an initiative going on where they're trying to do just that. They found grants to help residents who own houses to improve them. Landlords to improve those properties. We just had a bunch of properties along here that were condemned because they weren't livable anymore. And so that's what I would be advocating, is this is a partnership. The other piece of this is somebody's got to maintain this. There might be some really good value to serving the arts in an outdoor environment. And so that's where some of that, when I say partnership and private funds, most of these big ones, there's a team behind it. It's not just the state, the city. There's a lot of other people engaging in that because once you build it, you got to maintain it. You can't just walk away, because then it just falls into disrepair and it doesn't do what it was supposed to do in the first place. So there are key partnerships that have to go. And more importantly, as this thing goes forward, the state has to be right on top of those things.
well, it just seems to me it's a great economic development project in a way, and
Yeah.
setting aside the problems of equitably sharing the increased value. But thanks.
Thank you very
Absolutely.
much, Dave. We really appreciate your being here, and we'll look forward to learning more as the project moves forward, as I'm sure it will. Thanks so much.
Absolutely.
And thanks to all of you for being here. And if you'd
Yes.
like to hear part 2, join us on January 19th for that program. And next week, our very own Dave McBride is going to do a program, part of what will be an intermittent series called Both Sides Now. How do we talk across great divides? How do we move forward with less division, less rancor? So join us next Thursday, and we'll look forward to seeing you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good night.
Right, thank you.
Good night.